but we will start off this show with some comments that were made this week regarding the Mariners. Larry Stone, friend of the pod, soon to retire. I think he's retiring, after the World Series, I don't know exactly what date.
I believe it's mid-November. I don't know the exact date either, but I think he's got a couple weeks left.
Okay, but one of his final trips, he did make it down to Arizona to see a World Series game, and it wasn't just to go watch the baseball. It was to go work, and it was going to go talk to Paul Sewald, and he interviewed him for a column this week in the Seattle Times. You can go read it online. It is live. It is published. And Paul had some interesting things to say. I mean, Paul, while we were on vacation, went on foul territory and had some things to say about his exit from the Mariners as well. And it seemed, reading this article from Larry, that Paul didn't really want to talk about it too much, but there was a couple of word choices that he used that I thought were especially interesting.
So his words were, when he talked to Larry about this article, he said, "I had things to say before the season, and it turned out exactly how I thought it was going to go." Sewald also added that it was frustrating, and that he said that Jerry and those guys have their work cut out for them to try and figure out how to make the Mariners better. But I think the headline that everybody's looking at is Paul Sewald saying, "I had things to say before the season, and it went exactly how I thought it would go." So that says to us that he didn't love the idea of the only acquisitions being Colton Wong, AJ Pollock, Tommy LaStella. I'm sure he was happy with the Teo trade, but I think his sentiments were similar to the rest of the fan base. And it sounds like if the Mariners fandom was to sit in that locker room and talk to the team, there'd be a lot of people on the same wavelength right now, and Paul Sewald being one of them.
And we're glad Paul goes on the record with this, because once Paul says this, like, Cal's the leader of the team. So he was definitely saying this too, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Paul Sewald said when he was on foul territory. He was asked about Cal Raleigh's comments at the end of the season, and he said, I totally understand where Cal was coming from. He thinks what he said was totally fair, totally reasonable, and we saw teammates of Cal's back him up when he said it, and now he's got former teammates doing it in Paul Sewald. So what this starts to say to me is, there seems to be some disconnect between players and front office, which is not good, because a couple years ago, it felt like once Jerry got the Kyle Seagers, the Kendall Gravemans, players like that out of the building, it was his group, guys that saw his vision, and things would start to get cleaned up a little bit heading into 2022 and forward. Well, here we sit 2 seasons later, and his own group of guys is sitting here saying the same thing that the old group was saying, which is, why are we not spending money? Why are we not adding in free agency? Why are we not doing everything we can to go win the World Series?
I think the thing I was thinking about with Paul in regards to Cal was, yes, he agreed with his comments, but was Cal also saying things at the beginning of the season? Like, how far did that seep? It was Paul's job as the leader of the team to go to management and go to Scott Service and eventually talk to Jerry Dipoto, Justin Hollander, and voice some of his concerns about the roster. But there's no way he was the only person who's like, yep, I think I would be comfortable saying something about this to Jerry because I think this is important. And unfortunately, it turned out Paul was right. Now, Paul has turned the page now, and there's a couple other quotes in here when Larry tries to ask him about the team. I mean, this was right at the top of the article. Larry asked, I forget the question Larry asked him, and he just goes, "Not my team. It's not my team. Some of those guys are my best friends. I'll see them next week when the season's over. But what happens in Seattle now is irrelevant to my career." So, like, he's moved on. Like, Paul has moved on. But I did think it was interesting. He chose some of those words to use regarding what happened, and didn't make quite the shockwaves, I think. And I think most of those shockwaves have already gotten out because of his appearance on foul territory. But not comforting to see, because the more people I see talk about this and the more players I see come out and say things and put things on the record, I'm just trying to figure out how far has this seeped? How many players in that clubhouse that are currently in that clubhouse think this way? The more that think that, the smaller your margins get. I mean, they are getting razor thin. And as we've mentioned, it has a chance to derail everything.
So to answer your question, it probably goes back as far as this past winter. I'm sure Cal Raleigh felt this way back in the winter. I'm sure he thought the Mariners didn't do enough. And from the guys that backed him up, JP, Logan Gilbert, Ty France, I'm sure others that didn't speak publicly about it, probably felt the same way in spring training too. They're probably looking around and saying, that was a pretty loaded free agent class. We just came off a 90-win season and breaking a 21-year playoff drought. Why aren't we adding more? Why aren't we going for it more? Here's a question for you. Who on this team doesn't have an issue with how the Mariners are handling free agency and trades right now?
I'm going to decline to comment on that.
I mean,
I don't know. I'm to be honest, I don't know.
It doesn't feel like it's a lot of guys. So
the fringe roster guys, probably, because they're the ones that would get replaced.
And that's not a good sign. If you've got all of your core players, either internally or externally, feeling that type of way about the front office, not good. And that just doubles down on what we said and what we have been saying on previous shows. This is the most crucial offseason they've had maybe in our lifetime. Because if they do not make some waves this winter and they don't really get the roster better this winter, there's really going to be some problems.
Yeah, internally and externally as well. All three levels that you could ask for.
Because if you're Cal, Julio, JP, some of these core guys, Logan, George Kirby, and you're out there busting your tail all winter to try and work your ass off to get this team over the top to take them to the World Series. Look what JP did. He went to Driveline last winter. He revamped his whole swing. He came back a totally different player offensively. If that happens again, and these guys are putting in that level of effort to do their part to get their team to the promised land, and the front office turns around and says, oh, I see players giving their max effort. Let us show you our max effort of adding Harrison Bader and a lateral trade, and that's our offseason. That is not going to sit well.
No, it won't. And I will say for these comments for Paul, I'm glad he was in a good mood after returning home to Arizona after serving up that game tying home run in game 1 to Corey Seager, which was a nuke. It really was. And Paul, it's not the Paul we're used to seeing, and he's been nails in these playoffs. So glad he was able to bounce back from that.
People ever going to learn to stop giving Corey Seager first pitch cookies? This dude had a 1031 OPS against first pitches this year. On the first pitch, 1031 OPS. We can save some of this for later, but yeah, just since you brought up the home run he gave up, man, people do not.
I will note that today in his home run in the game that is going on currently on Tuesday, he waited until the second pitch to hit his home run. So, he's getting a little more patient.
Well, good for Corey. Not that he needs it if he's just going to tee off on the first pitch all the time, but hey, do what you got to do. I will say for Larry, though, he said he has a story coming out about Corbin Carroll, too, which is the other reason he went down there, was to talk to Paul, and was to talk to Corbin Carroll, who's obviously Seattle royalty now. And I'll be interested to see that story when it comes out, too. So shout out to Larry. He got to see a World Series before he retires.
Are they going to talk about the 2016 state title game?
Well, they should. If Corbin wants to talk about his adversity of having to overcome such a devastating loss to such a juggernaut of a ball club, yeah.